It's 5:05 and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, yesterday evening it was the North Carolina Senate and the Republican majority that released a proposed $66 billion biennium budget yesterday evening, outlining major funding priorities for the 25 through 27 fiscal cycle. Here in North Carolina, the budget is done in a biannual way. It is released every 2 years. They come back in the off year and do some budget corrections. Key provisions in the 439-page proposal include pay raises for public employees, hurricane recovery, investments, tax cuts, and other policy changes. Here is the leader of the North Carolina Senate, Phil Berger, as he announced this yesterday in front of the media and at the North Carolina General Assembly.
Without a doubt, this is one of the fastest timelines that we've seen for pulling a budget together. I want to thank Speaker Hall for his willingness to engage at an early date on the issue of the total spend, and I think that has assisted us in getting to this point. I'm sure y'all would like to hear more details other than what I've just gone over. So the first year of the biennium, the budget is about $32.6 billion. Second year, $33.3 billion. That's modest growth, but it is growth. It allows us to replenish the rainy day fund, address our most pressing needs, including Hurricane Helene recovery, increase salaries for most state employees and teachers, and further cut taxes for all North Carolinians. We also look ahead to initiatives that will build on North Carolina's already stellar reputation among the states.
And you heard some of those key priorities there from Phil Berger. You heard about the increases in pay for employees, tax cuts for North Carolinians across the board. We'll start with those increases in pay, a lot of them for state employees. Once again, here's the Senate leader.
The budget makes a concerted effort to target funds to areas with the most pressing workforce shortages. Most state employees will receive an across-the-board 1.25% raise in the first year of the biennium, and over the course of the biennium, $3,000 in the form of a bonus. Correctional officers will receive an additional average 5.25% raise for a total raise of 8.9%, including step increases. Probation and parole officers will receive an additional 2% for a total raise of 3.25%. State law enforcement officers, state capitol police, law enforcement officers within the Division of Marine Fisheries, Forestry, Parks, and Wildlife Resources will also receive an additional 5.25% raise for a 6.5% total. The budget allocates $8.9 million to standardize the experience-based law enforcement salary schedule and provide an additional 5.25% raise for sworn members of the State Highway Patrol, the State Bureau of Investigation, and alcohol law enforcement agents who are included in this new salary schedule. SBI and ALE officers moving back to this step schedule will result in an average salary increase of 14.4%, including step movement. State Highway Patrol officers will receive an average salary increase of 9.2%, including step movement. To show our appreciation for the hardworking men and women who put their lives on the line every day to protect us, this budget provides a $3,000 bonus over the biennium for local law enforcement officers. Teachers will receive an average 2.3% pay increase for fiscal year 25-26 and an average increase of 3.3% over the biennium, including steps. Teachers will also receive a $3,000 bonus across the biennium. Under this proposal, it's estimated that average teacher pay will be at $62,407. On average, teachers will receive an additional compensation with the step increases and the pay raise and the bonus of 8.9% over the biennium. There's also additional recurring appropriation of $30 million into the state-funded teacher supplement. That supplement was established in 2021 to assist most counties with teacher recruitment and retention. The revised budget amount for that program is now $230 million, and the maximum supplement a teacher can receive is $5,000, and that's in addition to the regular teacher pay schedule. In line with other state employees, state-funded non-teacher public school employees will receive a 1.25% across-the-board increase in 25-26. Unlike the governor's budget, we fully fund the actuarially determined amount needed for the state's retirement system so that we don't get into the kinds of problems we've seen in other states where the state has failed to fund the pension plans. We also fund the state treasurer's request for increased funds for our state health plan. Finally, we provide an additional special separation allowance of state and local law enforcement officers with at least 20 years of experience.
A lot to go over in those comments there from the Senate leader in Phil Berger. Across the board, big pay increases coming for state employees. You could hear some of the priorities in his comments. A lot of time focused on education, salary increases across the state, law enforcement, both state and local law enforcement getting a pay bump as well, and even highlighting some other areas that we've covered in the past, including the North Carolina Forest Service. We've heard some comments with those wildfires that have burned over the last couple of months here in the state, the need to increase pay for individuals within the fire service, hearing some of those comments as well. The Senate leader then transitioned over into tax cuts for the state of North Carolina. Tax cuts have been something that the Republican-led General Assembly has been working on for well over a decade at this point, and those tax cuts, as it stands right now, will continue across North Carolina.
The finance package in the Senate budget continues our tax reform efforts that began in 2011. Since then, we have significantly reduced the tax burden on North Carolina's individuals and businesses. Beginning with the personal income tax, this body has reduced the rate from 7.98% in 2010 to the current rate of 4.25% in 2025 and 3.99% in 2026. Our proposed budget builds on these efforts by cutting the tax by 0.5% in both 2027 and 2028, leading to respective rates of 3.49% and 2.99%.
So for personal income tax across the state, if this budget is to be adopted, 3.49% coming up in 2027, the end of the biennial budget, and 2.99% in 2028. We have spent some time over the last couple of months also talking about the franchise tax as that affects us businesses here in North Carolina. Part of the financial plan is to get rid of the franchise tax in some cases and up the threshold in other cases. Once again, the Senate leader, Phil Berg.
The budget also helps small businesses through changes to the franchise tax. Current law has a cap on the franchise tax for the first $1 million of a company's net worth. An S Corp and a C Corp currently pay $200 or $500 respectively on that $1 million. This budget increases that $1 million threshold to $5 million, meaning that S corporations' $5 million value will be taxed at $200, and C Corp's first $5 million will be taxed at $500.
Obviously, a lot of details to go through this morning. We'll continue that coming up here in just a few minutes. We've got some details on some increases in sports wagering taxes for the individuals that are providing that service, plus some details on Hurricane Helene and additional education funding across the state of North Carolina. We'll get into those details coming up. It's now 5:14. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at the roadways on your Tuesday morning. A look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Good.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We are continuing our discussion this morning on a proposed budget released yesterday by North Carolina Senate Republicans, a 439-page proposal, $32.6 billion in this fiscal year, $33.3 billion in the next. That begins in July. July 1st is the kickoff of the 2025 fiscal year. In total, a more than $66 billion biennium budget introduced by Republican leaders in the Senate yesterday afternoon. We've gone over some of the priorities and some of the details from Senate Leader Phil Berger. Something that has been a great success in North Carolina for the state in terms of revenue has been sports wagering, mobile sports betting. You've seen the commercials all over the state. And well, those individuals, or the companies rather, that are providing those services, they are going to see a big-time increase in what they're paying in this budget if it is to go forward as well.
Finally, the package increases the tax on sports wagering operators from 18% to 36%. There are multiple states that tax higher than that, and 36% is an amount that several other states have. This tax is paid from the profits made by sports wagering companies and is not an increased assessment on North Carolina citizens or North Carolina businesses.
So from 18 to 36%, a big-time increase there. Sports betting has generated plenty of money for the state of North Carolina. They're looking to get a little bit more of that. We'll obviously watch the House proposal and see if a similar number pops up in there. Now turning to some more individual purposes of the budget. Obviously, Hurricane Helene and the continued recovery efforts there. If you asked lawmakers 1 year ago what was going to be your big priority in the budget, nobody would have said Hurricane Helene, as the storm affected our state back in September of last year. However, it has caused an estimated $60 billion in damage, and that has very much thrown a monkey wrench into state funding. Here is Senator Ralph Heiss describing some of the continued funding efforts throughout the biennium budget that Republicans in the Senate are pushing forward.
As we've been saying since Helene struck Western North Carolina back in the fall, recovery efforts are going to take time. And funding will be allocated over several bills. It is our understanding also that Governor Stein is working on another request for recovery needs, but we are not at that point yet. Thus far, we've put more than $1.4 billion towards Helene recovery, and this budget will add another $700 million into the Hurricane Helene reserve. Of that $700 million so far, $8 million is to provide to the UNC system for Appalachian State, UNC Asheville, and Western Carolina University, and the North Carolina Arboretum to improve emergency response capabilities. 2.5 to the community college system to aid colleges who've experienced enrollment loss after the hurricane. $5 million to the Division of Community Revitalization at the Department of Commerce, and $10 million is allocated to the Governor's Recovery Office for Western North Carolina, acronymed as GROW-NC. The remainder of the funds will be available as soon as the budget process continues and as an additional recovery needs are known. Separately, within the transportation budget, several temporary and permanent cuts were made to secure funding for the Western North Carolina recovery. Altogether, these changes will provide more than an additional $633 million over the biennium to ensure the continued recovery of Western North Carolina. Again, that is separate from the $700 million being set aside. We remain hopeful that the federal government will provide increased and expedited reimbursements, but we must prepare to fend for ourselves. Additionally, this budget also directs various state agencies to prioritize Helene-impacted counties for the consideration of certain grant programs during the biennium. Collectively, these grant programs will represent more than $750 million in this budget. These include things like the Needs-Based Public School Capital Fund, the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund. This budget also directs the interest this fund earns, nearly $40 million, to be sent to the Department of Public Instruction to add funds to the Capital Recovery Fund for public school facilities programs created in the previous Helene legislation. Finally, we appropriate the $685 million in federal clean water and drinking water state revolving funds for repair and replacement of drinking water and wastewater infrastructures damaged by the hurricane.
A lot in there as well. Some of those key highlights, of course, include that $700 million investment in recovery efforts for Hurricane Helene, $633 million in temporary and permanent repurposing of funds within the Department of Transportation, and the big thing, restoring the rainy day fund to $4.75 billion. That fund currently sits at $3.61 billion. So lawmakers setting that money aside not only for Helene, but for other natural disasters and events that could affect our state coming up at any point. Senator Ralph Heiss from Mitchell County then transitioned into talking about some the federal changes that could have an impact on North Carolina, including a work requirement for an extended Medicaid coverage in the state as well as certificate of need.
The budget also directs DHHS to move ahead with seeking a work requirement for Medicaid recipients. And additionally, and not to be glossed over, it repeals the archaic certificate of need laws that drive up costs for patients by stifling competition. It also includes provision from a previously passed bill to lower health care costs for all patients. These provisions shine a light on every part of the health care system to see where the cost drivers truly exist and to start to tamp down on those costs. By such things such as addressing billing transparency, fair billing and collection practices, and prohibiting facility fees.
A certificate of need is something that we have talked about a lot over the last couple of months. It is a system currently set up in the state where healthcare providers and facilities have to go to the state to request a, certificate of need before they get new beds, bring in an MRI machine, other sorts of medical equipment. Under the Senate proposal, that money would, or that proposal, the idea that those individuals would have to go to the state would be removed, and various healthcare providers and facilities would be able to decide that on themselves whether they need additional beds, need additional funding. We'll then transition over to education. We got some details from State Senator Michael Lee, who is now the majority leader in the North Carolina Senate, about education and how funding for education will wrap up in this Senate budget as well.
So to start out, in addition to the across-the-board raises and state-funded supplements and the various bonus programs that are found within the budget in previous years and this year, there's $16.2 million in the first year and $20.1 million in the second for salary supplements to teachers in the advanced teaching roles districts. The school safety remains a priority for the General Assembly. We'll invest over $70 million over the biennium for school safety grants. As you all know, this can be used for students in crisis, school safety training, safety equipment, and also subsidizes the school resource officer grant program. And so on to the UNC system. It provides additional funds to the NC Promise program. Tuition for out-of-state students is going to go up just a little bit from $2,500 to $3,000. Still an incredible deal for out-of-state students to attend our great North Carolina schools.
And we'll get into some more details on funding for the UNC system as well as the community college system with State Senator Michael Lee coming up here in just a few minutes. It's now 5:28. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at the roadways on your Tuesday morning, a look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
536, welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. We continue our discussion this morning of the Republicans in the North Carolina Senate and their budget proposal released last night. It is a $66 billion biennium budget that was brought forth by Senate Republicans, a 539-page proposal, including some key priorities, pay raises for public employees, hurricane recovery investments, tax cuts, and other policy changes. We're now hearing on the education front from State Senator Michael Lee. He most recently became the Senate Majority Leader, and he'll talk a little bit about the UNC and community college system and some investments that state lawmakers are making there.
We direct the UNC Board of Governors to review all centers and institutes across the system to identify and eliminate those that are low-performing, redundant, or in conflict with federal or state law, ensuring alignment with the system's overall vision and purpose. We also instruct the UNC Board of Governors to conduct a comprehensive review of academic programs across the UNC system with the goal of reducing costs and improving student outcomes. UNC Asheville and UNC Greensboro are exempt from this review because they actually already went through it on their own and experienced significant long-term savings at both universities. We think that as we kind of move this out to the whole university system, this will enable the system to realize greater efficiencies across all the constituent institutions. And so moving on to the community college system, as everyone knows, are becoming more popular than ever before. We've seen community colleges across our state become integral partners in supporting business growth and development, and we really want to continue building on those efforts and support high-demand industries and fields. This budget will appropriate $36.5 million to increase funding for pathways related to healthcare, engineering, advanced manufacturing, trades, and transportation and information technology community colleges through the Propel NC initiative. It also will provide over $12 million over the biennium for the community college system to support the implementation of new programs in high-demand career fields that require significant startup funds. You've probably heard of these referred to as high-cost startup fund programs in the various schools. And the budget also appropriates $3.85 million in recurring funds to expand the number of colleges from 15 to 25 in the training program for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to help them enter to the workforce. This will now have about $7.8 million in this program.
Some big changes there for the UNC system, asking all UNC schools, minus a couple that have already gone through processes, to review the programs that they currently have, review the various departments and various courses that they are offering to try and reduce any sort of to try and gain some efficiencies, reduce any overlag and things that go on within the community college and a UNC system. There was a question by the media about some projections that have come from state budget offices and management offices about potentially lowering tax cuts and how that could have an impact on the state's revenue going forward. Senate Leader Phil Berger answered that question.
So that's the same thing that we heard in 2013 with our first tax reduction. It's the same thing we've heard repeatedly with every tax reduction that we have proposed. And notwithstanding those cries of gloom and doom, what we have seen is the state's economy continue to grow and to flourish. And as long as the economy continues to grow, it is our belief, and our belief that is backed by our experience over the last decade and a half, that revenue to the state will be more than adequate to address the funding requirements that we have as far as the state budget is concerned.
Going through a lot this morning, really only scratching the surface on this state budget. We've got a lengthy article up this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com, where you can read through additional details, everything discussed in the nearly 450-page budget proposal. This is the Senate version of the budget. There will be a House version of the budget as well. They will come together with their final proposal, and then it will make its way over to Governor Josh Stein's desk for either a signature or a veto. Lot to track on that over the coming months. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 540, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We have unfortunately covered a lot of bad news out of Western North Carolina over the last 6 months or so. However, this morning we will change that tune and cover a pretty big housing project that has been announced, and it does surround a major country music star. To get some details on that this morning, Katie Zender, CarolinaJournal.com, joins us on the News Hour. Katie, you've been following some of the charitable work that is going on in Western North Carolina to help some of those folks recover and get their life back to some semblance of normalcy. Eric Church has played a big part of that. What are the details this morning?
Right. Good morning, Nick. Thank you for having me on. So last Friday, Eric Church announced that he has finally broken ground on his housing development in Avery County. And this is a development of almost up to 50 homes that is specifically for Hurricane Helene victims. This initiative started back in February when he first purchased the land and announced that he was going to be, starting on this development. The timeline has been pushed back a little bit. They're hoping to get people into houses by as soon as the end of this summer. I think the original timeline was June, but that's been pushed back a little bit to the end of this summer. But they finally just broke ground on this project Friday, and this land was purchased through Eric Church's nonprofit, which is known as the Chief Cares Foundation. This nonprofit was started by Church and his wife Catherine back in 2013. And yeah, this is a huge deal, not only for North Carolina, but Eric Church is not only a legend in country music, but he's also a native of North Carolina. So that makes it really significant here in the state, Nick.
Well, and I think folks might remember back this major country music concert that happened in the Charlotte area back just a couple of months ago. It was a headline. One of the major headliners was Eric Church. He's played a large part in bringing, and I guess maybe more than anything else, Katie, shining a light on still what's going on in the western half of the state. Now that the major mainstream media outlets have left and those stories aren't topping every newscast anymore, it's his voice and others that continue to shine the light on a lot of work that still has to be completed out there.
Right, that's exactly right, Nick. And so, like you mentioned, back in the fall, just almost exactly 1 month after the hurricane hit, Eric Church and Luke Combs, who's also a North Carolina native, by the way. Luke Combs, I believe, is from Asheville, but they kind of partnered together to put together Concert for Carolina, a charitable concert, and alongside these two, country music stars, they brought in all these other, major names in country music to raise money for Western North Carolina. And they brought in people like James Taylor, Keith Urban, Bailey Zimmerman, Scotty McCreery, another North Carolina native, by the way. The concert, garnered almost 82,000 attendees and raised almost $25 million for hurricane victims. And the proceeds were split between Church and Combs for hurricane relief efforts. And it was actually at this time that Eric Church announced that he was going to be bringing this initiative, 100 homes in 100 days. And he calls this initiative the Blueprint for the Blue Ridge. So this is an initiative of, the Chief Cares Foundation, Eric Church's nonprofit, and that's really where this got started. And he's really been following through. This first development is going to be about 45 homes. And back in February, he announced he's already looking to purchase even more land, because before even breaking ground on this first home or on this first development last Friday, this development is already completely sold out, Nick.
Yeah, well, you bring up a couple of things there. Not only is this going to be, as you mentioned, between 40 and 45 homes, but you're talking about a lot of work here. They've got to purchase the land, outfit the land with utilities, water, sewer, all of that stuff, then build the houses on it. But it seems like, looking at some of the details, it's pretty remarkable. 1 to 3 bedroom houses available, customizable floor plans. And one of the things that I was reading in your story was the fact that they will also be helping individuals financially as well throughout this process, select families up to 3 years if they still need help getting back on their feet. Remarkable work.
Right, that's exactly right, Nick. So, these are fully equipped homes with water, sewer, all of that, 1 to 3 1 to 3 bedroom floor plans. That they are going to be, selecting families to receive financial assistance for up to 3 years if needed. Families will also have the option to purchase their homes, and the Chief Cares Foundation will help them with accessing resources to make those purchases as needed. I'm not sure, what the vetting process or how they're going to go about, picking families to receive financial assistance, what their process or their, credentialing for that is, like who qualifies for assistance and who doesn't. But that is something that they have mentioned, is that they're going to be offering assistance to these families, to kind of get their lives back together and purchase their homes if needed.
I think you mentioned that this is one of potentially more of these developments that could pop up. As I understand it, there's even some additional land searches going on in Western North Carolina right now to find some additional property to purchase and presumably follow a similar blueprint to what we're seeing now in Avery County.
Right, that's exactly right, Nick. So about 2 weeks ago, they announced through the Chief Cares Foundation that they are going to be looking to purchase more property because even before they broke ground on this development, the development was already completely sold out, and so they are looking to purchase more land in that kind of same area, that kind of the Avery County area. The specific development that they just broke ground on is near Newland, but they are looking to purchase more land. And, he did make this announcement, back in the fall, 100 homes in 100 days. So potentially he's looking to add at least a minimum of another 55 homes. So that could be another development or two. Another really interesting thing to note here, Nick, and this is something that Eric Church has talked about a lot, is when these disasters hit, there's a lot of, kind of the 911, like immediate response. But Church has really emphasized there's not a lot of like follow through and helping people, kind of, get their lives back together. It takes a long time once you go through a disaster like Hurricane Helene and you've pretty much lost everything. It takes a long time to kind of get your life back together and get back on your feet. And so that's something that Church is really emphasizing. And so the Church Foundation really wants to create a national model and a national structure for keeping families in their communities when disaster hits, because that's another thing is, we have these 911 responses, but unfortunately a lot of times people are not able to stay in their communities. So Church really wants to keep people in their communities, provide that, kind of a long-term disaster response. And he really wants to create a national model for how we respond to disasters nationwide. And so, it's starting here in North Carolina, but this is really something that he wants to take nationwide through the Chief Cares Foundation.
Yeah, it seems like some phenomenal effort up to this point. We'll continue to track what happens both privately and publicly, of course, some of these groups, and then there will continued relief through both the federal and state government here. Katie, you've got some additional details not only on this housing development, but a string of stories as it relates to Eric Church and the group, the work that he's doing with his group. Where can folks get those details this morning?
Right. People can read the latest story as well as, all the previous stories that I've written on this kind of saga that are linked there at carolinajournal.com.
Katie Zender joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:48, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time for another look at traffic this morning, a look at the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
WBT and Tommy D Productions presents George Norrie Live, coming up this Saturday, April the 19th, 5 to 8 p.m. at the Booth Playhouse in Charlotte. The legendary George Norrie from Coast to Coast AM will lead an interactive evening featuring special guests Vincent Jania, Samantha Fay, and Danien Brinkley. The show will include questions and answers from George and his guests, a salute to our country's military veterans and first responders, and George will even sing some songs with a live band. To top it all off, Bo Thompson and Pete Callender will also be there to say hello. It's all presented in part locally by Monica the Medium at the Healing Tree Boutique, who will also be on site offering readings at a special price. It's George Norrie Live this Saturday, April the 19th at the Booth Playhouse. Visit WBT.com this morning for tickets and details. 5:56, welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. A panel of North Carolina Superior Court judges is weighing whether appointments to the State Board of Elections will shift from Governor Josh Stein to State Auditor Dave Bolick coming up here very soon on May 1st, as mandated by Senate Bill 382. Although former Governor Roy Cooper vetoed the legislation in December of last year, it was overridden by a veto in the GA, prompting a legal challenge that is now known as Stein v. Hall or Stein v. Berger. Governor Stein, a Democrat, is seeking a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction to prevent the challenge. The Republican-controlled General Assembly and Bolick are opposing his request. The judges in the case that did hear arguments yesterday in Wake County, comprised of 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, questioned both sides very sharply. Judge Hamilton expressed concerns over a potential, quote, slippery slope of eroding executive authority, while other Republican judges questioned whether the court was being asked to insert language into the Constitution that doesn't currently exist. Attorneys for the legislature and Dave Bolick's office countered some claims that the Constitution does not assign election responsibility specifically to the governor, nor does it mention the Board of Elections at all. They argue that the legislature has the authority to assign powers and that a shifting responsibility to the auditor would cause a greater partnership between the state board and the auditor's office. The panel took the matter under advisement with no immediate ruling, so we'll expect a ruling from them in the coming days and weeks. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.